Yeah. Let's all welcome Mike Kowalski. He is in Australia as we speak, and we're going to see him and some slides or a video.
I did a video presentation of me doing a plein air painting.
Okay,
So we'll play that and talk about that, and then I've got some other things to show and talk about. But
excellent.
my focus for this meeting, and I'm how many people are on board here?
Two, 6, about almost a
That
dozen.
doesn't that matter that much. I don't see a few on the screen. I wanted to say thank you for showing up and welcome to this meeting. Um, I love your part of the world. I don't. So are you based out of Monterey?
Yeah, yeah. Our
Okay.
group is based out of Monterey, but we paint up and down the coast.
Yeah.
Some of us go plein air, some of us are studio painters, some of us do a little both. There is another big plein air group that a lot of us also belong to that. So there's a lot of that here. The weather is
Yeah.
usually lets us anyway.
Yeah.
Not lately,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
yeah.
I did my both Lynn's and my mom, our mothers, ended up in San Luis Obispo.
Oh,
So so we spent a lot of time visiting. I know San Luis Obispo very well, so did a lot of painting in that area.
yeah.
And it's interesting that coastal area, which I know from driving up and down there all the time when I was younger, I didn't get down to that Monterey Peninsula that much in my adult life, even though I know it pretty well. And my entire family's all from the Bay Area, so spent a lot of time in San Francisco and Marin and Sonoma. But somehow I'd always wanted to be in the plein air show there that they have in Monterey when I was starting, but I think the one year I applied or was going to get in was the first year I was coming to Australia. So
Of
uh,
course.
yeah,
Well, I got an extra room. You want to come down? Bring your wife out
great.
of the room. You can do it.
Um, so let's go ahead. We'll probably get right into the video here, but I'll
Yep.
do a little bit of introduction about myself and how I started painting. I have five brothers, and and I'm in the middle. So I was the one that was often forgotten. My
Yeah.
two older brothers would be off, and my younger brothers would need more care from mom. And I just started developing a habit of drawing, crayons, coloring all the time. I'd be somewhere in the woods drawing and then painting in high school, and I was the high school artist that did the invitations for the dances and all that stuff, and did surfboard designs. My friends were surfers, so did designs on surfboards and skateboards, and started doing um, little logos for local businesses and things like that. And I went up going to school for a couple of years up in Humboldt State, not knowing that you could actually be a working artist. My dad was an architect, and he would bring home renderings of his buildings all the time, and I really enjoyed looking at them, though I didn't really see them as paintings, but I could see the hand behind the images. So I went to school to become with a degree in anthropology and philosophy until I think one of my dorm mates said, Mike, you can be an artist. You just so I skipped Humboldt, and I did take some courses in lithography. I was really enjoyed that, and I still did my drawing and painting. Would charge like $5 to do Valentine cards and things like that for people. So I left Humboldt and went down to Long Beach State, which had an excellent
Oh yeah.
art program down there. But that was too close to home, even though I like growing up in Southern California and my parents are fantastic. I just didn't want to stay where I'd grown up.
Rebel.
So
You rebel.
what's
Yeah.
that?
You're a rebel.
Well, I don't know about a rebel, but I had a good time there. But that kind of pointed me in the direction of illustration there. We had great instructors there, and a friend from high school said, "Well, Utah State has a really good program." and I did some checking around on Utah State, and they had an excellent program on illustration that's tied more into fine art than, say, like going to Art Center or one of the academies where it was full on illustration. In Utah, it was much more um, old world. So you would learn, you would start as soon as you got there, you start drawing from the figure. You didn't have to draw stuff first. They just threw you into the mix and let you be creative. And the teachers were fantastic. We brought in professionals from New York, San Francisco, and LA for seminars, and it was in the mountains in the middle of nature in northern Utah. And I really love that. I like hiking and backpacking and canoeing and all that kind of stuff. So it was fantastic there. So I ended up getting a degree in illustration, then moved back to California to get some work. And one of the one of the things I also love is soccer. And the first thing I did was join a local soccer club, and who happened to be in my club, but an artist named Dan McCaw,
Oh, I
who I
know
met
this
in
name.
Utah. So
Yeah.
Dan McCaw, he's older now, but he started doing romantic impressionism, I think, in Southern California, but he's moved on into more abstract figurative work. And so I started painting with Dan nearby. I'd go to a studio and start painting in oils and learned so much from him just by sharing a studio space with him. And that kind of was the impetus for me to get out and do a bit more of my own work, though I had to make some money. So I started doing illustration, always in watercolor. Um, and so my illustration career was providing me with a pretty good income. I moved up to San Francisco, had reps there and in New York, and was doing illustrations for anything from I did stuff for LL Bean, I did stuff for local theater groups, I did stuff anything from technical illustration to illustrations for Sports Illustrated, all sorts of things. So it was fun, it was creative, and it paid okay. And then I moved up to Seattle and then switched gears to become an architectural illustrator. It was a lot less stress, it paid better. The clients were much more appreciative and easier to work with. And so I kind of went full on into doing architectural watercolors,
That's a
which
big
was
shift, right?
yeah, it was a big shift, but I still did it kind of with the keeping illustration and art as my main background and driving force. So I would be doing kind of loose watercolors of these views of a city park or a library or a school or a government building. And that was a little bit different than the other illustrators who would be coming from an architectural background and
Right.
would be doing things that were a little bit tighter. And there are a lot of my contemporary illustrator friends or coworkers, or they're all big names. Tom Schaller, architectural illustrator, Bill Hook, illustrator, Michael Reardon out of Oakland, all illustrators that have kind of morphed into watercolor mainly because we weren't needed anymore once computers came in.
Yeah.
So with
Was
that,
was your plein air painting, did you make a shift from the illustration style to the fine
yeah.
art style?
So I didn't really start plein air painting until around that would have been around 2008, something like that. I never thought I was, I'd look at the plein air movement. It was really young then, and see the names in there. I thought I could never, yeah, I couldn't do that. But I applied to one in out of Hood River and got in, and it was a perfect fit. Outside, you're limited by your time, you're on your own, and you just have to get something done. You just have to do it. And I think all of those elements that are fighting against you in a way, if you have a good background or you're comfortable with your drawing and your painting, you don't have to be an expert, but knowing that you can pull off an image. And there's also the competition of, at the end of this thing, there's going to be a show or a sale. So there are awards and sales. So you want to produce some good paintings.
Right.
So all that really appealed to me in a way that I just fell in head over heels. And it changed my style of work quite a bit. I became looser. My pain became much more confident because you can't just mess around with things. You've
Right.
got to see something, interpolate it, and get it on the paper. So all of that made me a much better painter. And the guys that I know, or the people that I know that are plein air watercolor or just painters in general, would say the same thing. They would say, if you want to ramp up your skills, get outside and paint,
Yeah.
because you don't, it just compresses everything into a time period where you're forced to make decisions. When you're in your studio, you can mull it over a bit, you can take a break for a bit, you can walk the dog, make tea, see some, but you can't do that when you're outside. You're there, you see the spot. The spot is would be something that appeals to you, so your energy is up and the lighting's changing and you're working on capturing color, light, shape, all that stuff. And it's just there's a buzz to it that I just don't get in the studio. I love painting in my studio. I have a brand new little studio at our place down by the beach. It's a tiny, tiny little spot, but I haven't had an official studio since I've been down here. And I can hear nature outside and it's quiet and I can paint and I just love the process of painting almost wherever I am. But outside is just a different thing.
Yeah.
So I just started entering more and more of the plein air shows, made some great friends, traveled around the States doing the festivals and had a great time. And I try whenever I'm out, I try to go outside and draw or paint, even just to sketch because um, I take a ton of photographs as well. But just going outside with your sketchbook to capture what interests you as you see it on paper is a much better step than taking a photograph and bringing it home because it all changes. Even if it's a I brought some sketchbooks, so I'll flip through those. But I have been on road trips where I see something, I'll pull over and my flight's leaving in an hour. I have like 3 minutes to just put down a simple composition. And that's really helpful when I have pair that with a photograph. So yeah, being outside, you got to try
Makes
it.
a
And
difference.
it's
If you take a photograph, you go, why did I take this photograph?
That's right. Yeah. So you'll say, "Oh my gosh, this is great." You take the photograph and you're going through them and think,
Yeah.
"No, it doesn't. It's not the same."
Yeah, it's not what was I thinking?
So one of the things that I do a lot of is revisit the same spot over and over again. Um, Down at Shoreham, which is where we're gonna do the video today, I've got a number of favorite spots that I never get tired of painting. Um, Sometimes because the light changes a lot, sometimes because the light doesn't change a lot. Sometimes the thing we're doing today is a challenging piece because it's a lot of vertical elements with a horizontal element behind it. I have in the neighborhood where I live here in Melbourne, there are some streets around here that just I don't I don't know why, but there's something about the street or a house or the light that I can go back every week. I could do it forever. And it's a really good way to when you're revisiting the same subject, it's a really good way to rethink it. um, you can rethink the color, you can rethink the values, you can if you're going something that changes a lot atmospherically, try to really um, push color or mood or softness or values, all that stuff. And especially if it's a place close by that you can visit quickly. So the place that I'm painting in the video is a 12-minute walk, and every time I go to the beach, we go down that way, and it's always breathtaking as well. So, so I enjoy doing that painting at that spot, and I think we'll go ahead and I'll do screen share, and I'll get that up, and
Okay.
we'll get on. And all of you that are here watching, please, if you have any questions, just shout out and let me know, and I can pause the video and talk about what's going on there or but yeah, I really like a lot of questions. So
Okay.
so don't be shy, please.
Well, if they are,
Ask.
I'm not, and if you are too shy to shout out, you can leave it in the comments and I will ask Mike. I'm not afraid.
Okay, so the video is my journey to do a plein air painting and doing the painting, and it's the painting process is sped up a bit, so it's not too much of a slog to get through. But let's see if I can bring it right up. It's right here. And it's full size. So it'll get bigger screen in a little bit, but at this, I'm gonna walk you through this and put my volume up. So we live just at the end of our road as a reserve. And is everybody seeing just the screen? Because you may want to you may want to move the little things off the side to the right of everybody's in
Okay.
the meeting. So this is the reserve, and this is the trail along the cliffs. They don't allow dogs down there in the summer because it is a wild reserve, and there are a lot of nesting birds and little Australian animals about.
You mean a boot?
Sorry about that. Hold on. Oh, what did I do here? There we are. Now, I did something wrong here. All right, hold on. It's on my screen, but I tried to get rid of everybody on the side there, and
And
the
it only
share.
records the screen, so you're fine.
Okay, well, let's see if I can. There it is. Share. I don't know why it's not coming up on the screen now, though.
It's paused or something.
Oh, can you see it though?
I see it's almost a double image.
So you're
There it
seeing
is.
the video now?
Yep, I'm seeing the video. Yep.
Okay.
You're walking down to the beach.
So we're looking west, northwest here. And this is an area called the Pines, and these are all Monterey pines, like
Oh,
they have right? And they're not native to Australia. So I'm not sure why they were probably planted for lumber. And this is one of the only spots that they are on the peninsula. And so they just keep it as a reserve. This is the view that we're going to paint, looking out at the point that's Shore and Beach down there.
very similar to our area.
Very similar. In fact, this painting here, this is a plein air painting. All of these are plein air paintings except for one. A woman bought because it reminded her of Monterey.
Monterey. Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. So this will give you an idea of my style. I don't really have a real style of painting. I kind of approach everything. I'm not too worried about trying to fill it full of tricks and techniques. I just like to paint. But my plein air painting is a little bit looser, so I tend to like my results when I'm plein air painting if the painting turns out better than something I do in the studio.
do you have certain paints that you like, or a brand, or just do you have just
Yeah, I do like Daniel Smith paints,
yeah,
generally, except for a few colors. So yeah, they're my favorite for sure. Some colors like Viridian.
yeah.
I use an Emigram because Viridian is a strange paint. It tends to dry and crack and crumble. And then that's probably about the main color that I shop around for elsewhere. So these are all paintings. This is a real quick oil sketch of the same spot. These are all paintings and sketches of the area there. We were swimming there yesterday. It was gorgeous there yesterday. We had very warm day with thunder showers. It was
We had
beautiful.
hail, thanks.
So this is a small oil painting of the other side of that little head there, which I don't think has a name. And this is a studio painting that I did a while ago based on basically the same scene we're looking at today. It's a little tighter than I normally paint. I wanted to show this area here. You can see in the foreground, that's kind of typical of how I would do foregrounds. I've thrown a lot of different color,
Uh-huh.
um, different values as well, mix up the brush strokes. I don't use any masking things at all. So to create that, say that bush on the right, I paint around it with the dark of the tree. So
Right.
I paint around things. I don't, I don't save things with a masking fluid. I find that that's a much that painting without using masking fluid keeps things a lot more organic for me.
Yeah.
The other things that I do use a lot of in the lower right, you'll see is I use a scraping tool in the bushes. There's some scrapes in there. And when we go up into this tree, I did a first layer on this tree with some probably cerulean blue or cobalt blue, and then put the darker layer over it and scraped into it. And you get that beautiful blue showing through there.
Okay. Yeah, your shadows on these trees are lovely.
Thank you. Another spot, typical, that's what it would have looked like yesterday. There were tons of surfers out yesterday. It was a big holiday weekend here, the last weekend of summer. And I've never seen so many surfers out. There were also really good waves yesterday. So when I'm sketching, I like to take notes and I sketch the people that are walking by, um, which I really enjoy doing as well. And this is a slightly different view later on in the year when things are dried out. Another plein air shot, this slightly in a different location than where we're painting today. But as you can see, I really like the verticality of these trees.
Yeah.
And
And are you using a rough paper?
in here, it's either rough or cold press. I do like rough paper. So the painting I'm working on today will be on a rough paper. Yeah, I really like that texture. I like
Yeah.
using the texture in the paper a lot. So that's typically my setup. I'm pretty simple. I just have it on a tripod and I like to hold my palette. So here I had forgotten to bring a chair with me, so that stump was a very convenient place for me to sit. I've got the camera up there. That palette there is a Holbein metal palette, which is a really good palette. There's a lot of mixing room on there. And I just use a few brushes, losing one of them there. I lose a lot of brushes when I'm out painting. And these are the colors in my palette. I don't use all of them, but that's on the on the upper side, that's all watercolors. On the lower bit, there's some that's gouache down there. So I use the gouache for studies. I don't mix the gouache into my watercolor painting.
No.
And the first thing I'll always try to do is a really quick sketch of the painting that I'm doing. It kind of locks in my head what I'm going to be painting. It also gives me something to refer to because I move things around and I'll toss that at my feet to refer to when I'm putting the drawing on the paper. So that is rough Winsor Newton paper. And I don't wet the entire paper. I kind of do different things working from the top down. This is about as large as I'll work outside. I think this is an 11 by 14 sheet. And so I'm wetting the entire top of the paper, and some areas I will paint over and some areas I will paint around. I'm thinking about where I want some nice, warm, sunlit areas in some of these trees. So I'm painting around that one on the left. And
Just
on
so
the
you don't
right,
get some greens out of your yellows.
that's right. I don't want it to mix I'll get all of the colors if I'm mixing the warms right over that blue.
Yeah.
So I'm leaving some white over there, and I'm also going to drop in some wet and wet over the blue area, which will push that blue out. So I'll do that, and it creates a very nice soft background as well that I can paint over. If I'd let that blue dry and then paint it over with the sienna, you would get that more of a grade color.
Right.
So I will either pull out that blue with a moist brush to pull some of that paint out, or just drop in a fairly strong, not real watery mixture right over that background there.
And it'll push away your blue.
A little bit, yeah. I'll do the same thing with some foliage you'll see here in a minute. I'll often, when I'm doing trees, and I love painting trees, I'll drop in some background foliage in wet and wet a bit and let that kind of sit there um, and be soft. So that's mixture of probably some quinacridone gold or azo yellow with blue and rose. So I use those colors a lot.
You like that azo yellow, huh?
Yeah, I used to really like quinacridone gold, but they ran out of it. Daniel Smith doesn't make it anymore as a single
What?
pigment. Yeah, the original quinacridone gold was a single pigment paint, and it's always good to use a single pigment paint because there's just one color, and so if you're mixing it with other colors, you want to control how many colors you're mixing together. So
Right.
they sold out of it. And the new one is a mix, and in the mix they use the azo yellow as their yellow. So I've adopted that on my palette. So I just mix it with azo yellow and a little bit of quinacridone rose and a little bit of a blue, and that'll
Did
make
not
it pretty.
know that. That's my favorite color.
Yeah, it's still
Obviously,
a
I
nice
saw it
color,
in
but
the.
it's not the same. So I've just stopped using the one in the tube. So here I'm doing the background water bit here. I'm painting around some of the tree trunks, but you'll see I'll soften those tree trunk areas as well as I'm painting, just so I don't have a lot of hard edges showing up. It is difficult when you're doing a painting like this that has these strong verticals and a horizontal in the background.
Oh, I see.
Um, So, a way you can do it is paint all your darks in the foreground. I have some paintings where all the trees are backlit and they're dark, and that's much easier because you can paint the entire background, soften it a little bit by pulling some of it out. But here I want some sun and light and warm areas to be in front of that background. So I'm starting with just that central area, and then will on the sides there'll be less information. It is a lot easier to do this if you use a liquid mask and you
Right.
put it down the tree trunks. But to me,
When
the
you're working
liquid,
in plein air, though, is this something that you've go, oh, I know what to do after you've done it 100 times wrong, and then, or is it
yeah,
that you super
probably, probably because painting around things is a little difficult. But I probably learned this from also illustration. I mean, I used to use liquid mask for things, but that would usually be if I was doing a harbor scene with a lot of boats and a big bit of water, then I would use it for something like that. But in general, I find painting around everything just makes it look more painterly in the end.
yeah.
So I'm using here probably cobalt blue, and I'm graying it down a little bit with a burnt sienna or a mix that is like burnt sienna on there, graying down my background colors there so they recede. And I use probably maybe 4 brushes for typical painting. A small one, yeah, from as large as I can get to a rigger brush. And if you can, sometimes I get, well, I don't know if it's lazy or extremely brilliant to use a single brush. If you have, I use a round brush for everything. I like rounds. And if you have a round that will hold a lot of paint and also have a decent point, you can get by with one brush.
Yeah, when they're
So
new, they're perfect like that.
yeah, yeah. So I also like to put in some paintings my darkest darks and areas first. Um, it helps me see where things are by describing the dark side of something, and then that will dry and I'll wash over those dark bits and they'll soften up a bit. That's a little reverse of how you're taught to do watercolor. You save the darks to last, but sometimes, especially if I'm doing a painting that has a lot of shadow, I'll put those dark shadow bits in first.
Well, and sometimes when you're outside, the glare or the or the paint drying is unpredictable or not look like it does in when you get home.
Yes, for
So
sure.
you help that kind of compare other colors to it.
Yeah. And like you know that when you're outside and you see shadow areas, you can see color in there, but when you take the photograph, it just gets
Right.
dark.
Right.
So sometimes I'll do that. Often when I'm doing a subject that's more like a building, I know that light's going to change, and that's often why I'll put in some darks in right away. Also, notice how I will use the brush from time to time. When I was painting the rocks, I was really laying that brush long ways and letting it drag across that rough paper to create that texture of that would be the rubbly rocks there.
Right.
Uh,
I saw that in your tree foliage.
yeah. And it's a good idea to try to develop that different brush technique for certain things in your painting.
I always tell my students that the brush makes more than one stroke.
Yes. I do like the round brushes over I used to use a lot more of a chisel brush, but I found that the chisel shape tend to leave just too many square
Right.
edges.
I
And
agree.
I
Yeah.
prefer using a round brush, even if I'm painting something like windows in a building or something that is more square, the round brush gives it just a little bit more of an organic feel. So I'm softening up those edges a bit there.
And the green was wet still.
Yeah, the green was a little wet. It's a sunny day here, probably, probably not too warm. So things would dry up, but not super dry. Washing in the beach colors there, and I can wash right over those tree trunks because it's a pretty light color.
What color do you use for the sand?
So so I'm going to mix something that's a slightly grayed raw sienna. It's not too rich, grayed down a bit. Often a mix of cobalt, blue, and raw sienna works. Some some siennas will be a bit more yellow, so you might have to temper it a bit with rose. And basically, just a slightly warm gray is what I'm after here. Depends on how the light's hitting. If the light's coming from behind, you can see it's coming from behind me slightly. So I look at some of the things I'm painting now as almost placeholders or little jigsaw puzzle pieces because I've got a figure there and I want to save some of the light bit of the figure. So if I paint around that figure now, I won't forget it later and paint over it.
So
Um,
you do a pretty good drawing.
yeah, I'd
Yeah.
say I draw enough in there that gives me that information.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those things I'm painting now are not going to change. Um, there's not later on in the day there'll be some shadow coming across them, but I'm just putting in little bits of pieces here and there. Um,
Like you
so
said, a
here
placeholder.
I'm holding that brush in a much more delicate way there and letting that tip drag across the paper to create some texture. And I don't often work on my knees. I usually have a pal, you know, yeah, pal, a holder on my tripod. And I do like to stand when I'm painting. I almost always stand. So now I'm mixing some shadow color for those trees, I think. So you can see I'm mixing a purple, and I'll gray that down. Quinacridone rose is a great color, but it's really punchy, and I often put in too much. So I'm making kind of an olive gray in here and just starting to paint some of the dark sides of the tree.
Oh, so you're putting your shadows down first.
Yeah, putting those darks in the tree first. Another reason why that helps is it also sets up a really good value exchange in the
Yeah.
painting. So if I put in the darks right away, then I can adjust everything else. Um, and I do like on a sunlit day, I remember you can almost, it's really hard to see even when you're sitting there, the color in the shadow bits of the tree. The other thing that I do use a lot is scraping, and I had forgotten to bring my little scraping tool. And luckily there was a pine cone right there, and that it worked great. It worked great.
Classic. I love it.
So just to
Classic.
scrape a
Have
little bit
that.
of
You can sell
detail
those
in
Australian
there.
pine cones. Oh, that's perfect.
So I'm just thinking about, I'm going to change the pattern of the light and to try to make it work in my favor. Um,
Do you
and
drop in colors into your shadows? Do you leave them kind of that one?
yeah, I'll drop in colors. You'll see when there's a close up in it, and in my other paintings, I'll drop in. I don't make like one mix. You can see the mix there on the
Right.
palette. Yeah, I'll pull some warm or cool in and out of it. Um, I do like to paint when I'm doing trees and that are casting shadows. I like to paint that trunk and the shadow at the same time, so they create more of a tied together shape.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, water's getting pretty dirty. I don't know if I change it during this. So here I'm dropping in some more olive tones in that shadow, letting it bleed back a bit. I like painting with a palette that I hold because I can hold the palette right up to my face and really look at the color I'm mixing.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not using the thumb hole there, which I usually do. I'm not sure why I'm not using it there, but there. So I'm adding a little cerulean in there, using the side of my brush to let some of that paper kind of show through.
I mean, I can't, I'm battling here.
That's my partner came up and was asking me some questions.
Where are you?
Let me turn that sound
Sweetie.
on there.
When are you going to be home? Dinner's ready.
So now you can see in the shadows there that I'm putting in a lot of different color in there. Some
Yeah.
browns, that I'm mixing the browns there. Even though I love using the umbers there, I'm just mixing the yellow, the primaries together to create those warms and cools there. Scraping into the painting. The key to scraping is doing it at the right time.
Right.
In this mix, there's some areas that are too wet to really for me to scrape into it. Um, but yeah, the only problem with scraping into areas where it's too wet is
You get
the
the dark one.
you get that dark line in there. And sometimes that's okay, but sometimes it just doesn't. I mean, most people would not recognize that.
Right.
Um, but I know for me, I don't necessarily, I try to wait for it to set up, but
It's not an exact science. When
no.
the sheen drops off,
So I'm just painting around those areas that I'm going to save as lights. Sometimes I will put in that strong light first and then rub some wax over it and paint the
ah,
darks around it. But often I find that I like to even add more punch to the light areas after, and that wax resist will keep you from doing that. You can't add anything once you put the wax down.
do you outline your or your light areas, or is it just something that you're conscious of that this is my light, how it's following?
Sometimes I might do that. I might like mix up a very pale goldish color and paint those areas, those shapes in so I see them. They're not that important here,
Right.
really. I'm just thinking as I'm going along where they're going to where I want them to be. So I'm going to want a light area on the foreground tree here with a tree behind it darker.
Right.
So I'm just basically making it up as I go. Um, just thinking about how those trees are going to look best, the dark bits.
Uh-huh. I know personally when we paint outside and the light's changing, we usually are only out there for 2 or 3 hours, but it changes and you
Yeah.
are in the middle of painting and unless you're like you did with your preliminary drawing or really made a conscious effort of your lights and shadows, as you're doing it, you go, oh, this is dark, and you go, oh,
Yeah.
well, later you go, oh, I lost the light.
Yeah, when you are painting outside, probably the so if you do a sketch first and you lock in where the light's coming from and how it's hitting your subject. So for here, the light is coming from slightly left and hitting the right-hand side of the tree, and that will stay for a while. And once you lock that in and start painting with that in mind, it's pretty good. The foliage, that's not going to matter so much, at least in
Right.
this instance. It's going to be so much that's going to be in light and shadow, so that won't matter so much. It's just the light on the trunks. So these are fairly, as far as trees go, these are fairly easy to paint because the light doesn't change on them so quickly.
Gotcha. Now, do you think repainting that same scene over and over helps you with that?
Yeah, definitely. It definitely does. I don't ever try to each painting is its own thing.
Right,
And
right.
I don't think, oh, I really like what I did on the last one. Oh,
No, no, no.
or
I just meant that it's more of it's more, I don't know, cemented in your head that, oh, I lost light on that one, and I'm going to be more thoughtful of the light that I really like right now or something. It's
yes,
just, I think that in our group, we just went out and painted plein air. We didn't have anybody, I mean, some of us might have taken plein air classes, but there's not really um, instructions.
yeah. So I'd say by painting the same thing over, like I look at when I was looking at all the paintings I've done of this area, the one thing that I will try to do next time is think about a color change because these trees, I'm changing the color of these trees anyway. They're really interesting. The Monterey pines are very gray, but in certain light, they become just the colors on them are like a pinky gold. But
Huh?
I don't want to do that same color all the time. And
Right.
and actually, because of there are a lot of trees here and the light is broken up, the light on the trees doesn't change that much. It would have to be, really late in the evening or first thing in the morning or backlit when they're all in shadow. So I might think about how I could change my gray mixes or how I can maybe push more purple
Okay.
or make the whole painting very warm. And even the water warm, reflecting light. So,
Is that
so
something you think about before you start your painting, if you're going to do it cool or
I would
warm?
probably think about that as I'm going out there and trying to change it. Though a lot of that playing around is with color would be something I might do in the studio,
Uh-huh.
and do some color studies. So if I were to say I like this painting, but I want to do a studio painting a little bit larger, I may do a color study in acrylic or gouache, and
Oh,
play
yeah,
around a bit
yeah.
with the color to see if it's something that appeals to me. But almost every single time, I always like the original better.
Mm.
Um, again, because I'm painting outdoors, the decisions I make are mostly good if I like the painting, and duplicating that in the studio just doesn't seem as fresh to me, even though I try to make it as fresh.
You work from the plein air painting, or uh when you're doing an oil, let's say, if you like, if would you take this home and say, oh, I want to do that in oil, or do you work
Yeah,
from like a photograph?
I usually work reverse, so I'll do an oil sketch first and do a watercolor off of an oil.
Uh-huh.
Um, an oil painting I can probably work directly from um, a a sketch drawing or a gouache study. But I have done oils on, yeah, I probably do more of the reverse where I do a watercolor um, first and then make a watercolor from it, but I don't do that. I don't make an oil painting from a watercolor painting. I might do two versions of the same scene though, one in oil and one in watercolor.
Mhm. And you only use the gouache for your studies.
I only use the gouache for the studies. Sometimes I'll throw in little specks of some color gouache if
Uh-huh.
I need a real strong bit of a, some yellow or something that's really bright, but really just little specks. And the only reason that I don't use that primarily in my watercolors is I find that so now we've jumped ahead here. I'm going to stall us here a little bit. I find that the gouache in reproduction with the watercolors tends to keep the watercolors from looking as fresh as I want them to look.
Uh-huh.
So I brought a gouache study that I did. So I'll show that after we're done with the video.
Okay.
And yeah, I like to use gouache by itself is perfect. I really like it. But when I use it with the watercolor, I'll probably use more, but I really don't use it so much. So the painting's farther along here a little bit. Oh, this is so here I'm painting in my studio. So I'm finishing up in my studio because my camera died.
Oh, okay.
I'm glad I caught it um before I finished the whole thing and realized that my
It's
camera.
not on your knees.
Yeah, so that's as far as I got. And now I'm finishing up in my studio, which happens sometimes. I don't mind finishing a painting in my studio after I've got it to a certain point uh, in plein air. And even for the plein air shows that you're in, they can be really strict. But generally, they say the majority that have the painting has to have been started outside, or it has to be mostly plein air. But you can go ahead and pick away at it in your studio, and yeah, some of the events, the bigger events, are really picky. And I remember having some chats with some of the other painters where we felt that some of the painters in the competition, we're doing almost all of the painting inside. I mean,
Ah,
you can you can kind of tell when something is done on site and something is done in the studio, and a lot of it has to do with how detailed something is, how much information is in. If you're doing a painting that of a streetscape that has 30 cars and they're all drawn perfectly, it takes too much time to do that.
yeah.
So, I mean, it's not, I don't, it's not a big deal, but it's pretty interesting. And I really try to, again, in my studio painting, I really try to make it as fresh feeling as the outdoor stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. A lot of it is letting go in the studio, is just letting go and not worrying about it so much, just going with your gut, mixing the colors, putting it down, because that's what you're doing outside.
Right. Right.
So here I'm putting in a slightly darker value, which I may have been able to paint over that blue, but I really wanted it to be a nice rich color in there.
And you had saved it.
I had saved it, yeah. So I'm just washing over those light colors over that dark bit because it's all dried.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I am using the nickel yellow azo there, dropping
How
in.
how do you think that differs from the original quinacridone?
Uh, it's definitely yellow. So that just the azo yellow is a really bright, cool yellow, and it's very bright, and very intense. So I think the mixture that they have has, I'd have to check. It probably has three colors in it, or maybe
Mhm.
just two. So you have to be careful when you're using the yellow that things don't get too green or yellow in there. But it's a lovely color, and I prefer if I have one yellow on my palette, I want a cool yellow because I can always warm it up, but you can't cool down a warm yellow. So without changing it too much. So that Azo yellow, I used to use a Brilliant yellow,
Yep.
which I love, but it's not light fast. So not that it'll matter that much, but it turns very gray fairly quickly. I mean,
Right.
within depending on how the paintings are stored, it could happen within a few years. So I've stopped using it, even though it's still my favorite yellow. It's just got a beautiful working quality and color to it. So
I have that one and a CAD, and I went back to a CAD because it granulates, and but they're both. I I couldn't tell you which one was which because they're
yeah.
both like cool.
Yeah, I don't use cad yellow at all really. I have it, but I just don't I I don't I think for me mixing greens with cad yellow, the greens can get a little heavy for me. They can get
Yeah.
a little big. So yeah, I think it's more habit. I was very happy with the mixes I was getting from the three colors. For greens, typically it'd be ultramarine blue, the quinacridone rose, and the yellow. That's really, and a viridian. Often I'll throw in viridian in there as my only green on in my palette. But I have never needed anything more than that. It was funny when I came down to Australia. One of the first people I needed to meet was Bob Wade, who lives in Melbourne. He passed away probably about 3 years ago, and he would say, "Mike, what are you using green for? All you need is a little bit of raw or burnt umber and or raw umber and blue. You don't need to be using that green." And he used umber for mixing almost all of his greens. So keeping that in mind, keeping greens, I find teaching greens are one of those things that students tend to really pop more than they need to. And again, if you're outside and looking at the greens in nature, sometimes you will get those intense greens, but typically the greens are quite a bit more grayed and earthier.
Right. I started out with Windsor Green and then tried to mix everything from Windsor Green, and I'm trying to get away from that. But it was something I was taught, and it's one of those stupid knee-jerk things, and I
Yeah,
never like my greens
yeah.
because
Yeah, the
it's
Windsor green, it's good. I don't I used to use Windsor green for making darks, but I
yeah,
don't. The only thing I do have is I use some a Windsor blue or a phthalo blue at times because the water here is really tropical looking at times, and the cobalt or cerulean just doesn't quite work for that really intense, lovely, transparent, tropical
yeah,
blue. I'll use
yeah.
a cobalt turquoise or teal sometimes, but that the phthalo blue will give me that color I want. Um, and yeah, it works just fine. So for the trees, I don't know if you noticed, but I really let my brush dance around and create um, some uh, yeah, dancing brush strokes, give it a sense of foliage. I just pointed out there, I can go back here just a second,
I saw
um, that the values there of that tree in front of that headland are too close. and I need to, in order for that tree to stand out, I need to go darker.
Drop it
So there's
down.
my rigger creating some little brushy type brush strokes, or branchy, not brushy, branchy
Okay.
brush strokes. So for painting branches and trees, I'll use a rigger and I'll use my scraping tool, and dark and light. So you'll get a branch will be light in front of a dark, and sometimes dark in front of a lighter area. I always like those interchanges. You'll be in trouble if you do all your branches the same, where all the branches are dark
Right.
and the same color. So it's always good to mix things up here and there, and to use, a different brush for different widths in the branches. So I'm just making that shadow darker so it comes forward a bit, nice and dark. Those trees are really dark in there. You could probably paint them with a straight on Payne's gray and they would work fine. But there's very subtle reflected light that comes in, and yeah, it's nice to push that from time to time.
Yeah, you're a painter, not a photographer.
That's right. So I'm slowing down here a little bit at the top, figuring out how I want to paint that top branch. I wish I had left a little bit more of that light bit coming down lower behind this foreground tree, but
Oh, I see. Yeah, on the left.
yeah, just so you know it's the tree behind, but it's not that big of a deal.
Like you were saying, that dark against light, or
Yeah,
that
and
you
as the colors go by, I'm just adding a little bit more water to the mix and maybe a little bit more cool tone to the mix. Not too cool. They're not going to go really blue, but just a little bit less warm than the things in front. Sometimes those background trees, even though you think as it goes back they will recede in value, you can put dark trunks back there as well, because there's not a lot of atmosphere between you and those last trees. So they can go from dark to medium to dark again. That's not an issue, I don't think.
nice.
Get rid of that. And I would say typically when I'm doing plein air painting, I'll slow down at the very end, try to get the big things in there first, the big shapes, and then any little details, put them in there, but try not to be too fussy about them. Try to keep things simple. I'm using my dirty water there to mix. This is probably the grass areas I'm mixing here.
Oh, in your foreground.
I think so.
Oh my God.
No, maybe not with that. See, I'm mixing that a little bit of the rose up top so I can add it in without destroying my whole mix by putting in a brush full of that.
Of the
Really,
rose?
yeah, the quinacridone rose. And I'm just brushing over those saved, I'm gonna call them negative shapes. So I painted the darker shapes first
Okay.
and left the white, and I can really loosely just paint right over them. A little white tends to show up in my paintings, which I don't mind, and it just allows for an interesting mix of color. So I don't paint over all the shadow. One reason I do like painting the shadows first is I can mix and paint that shadow color on white paper, so I know exactly what that shadow color is going to look like, and then lay over the lighter colors on top or in those white areas. Whereas the
Oh,
traditional
oh,
way would be to paint the whole grass area green and then go over with darker colors, but you have that green area behind it.
yeah,
So even though it may not be that influential,
it could
I
be.
find that it is sometimes, especially if you've got like now that the colors on the grass is much more tawny and yellow, and the shadow colors are much more lavender. And I don't want a lot of that yellow showing up in that shadow color. So that's one reason I like to paint shadows first.
Good to know. I'm going to try that next time I go out.
And when we, at the end of this, when I do a close up and I'll show you, I'll do a, I'll pause it where and show you where I've painted, left some of that shadow area intact. So the last bits of the painting are adding more punch where I need to.
Mhm.
I often do that a day or two after the painting's done. I think, okay, it's done. And then I go back and I think, no, 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 it needs more punch here. And so
You leave
by,
it sitting up and look at it every time you go by it.
yeah, every once in a while, or even, yeah, I find that in order to make that sense of light really come through, sometimes it needs a bit more color.
Right.
So
Right.
using, your nice transparents to make some really strong color and little specks that you can just really dab on the painting, and it can really come alive as well. That
One teacher told me they were eyelashes. You had to paint the
eyelashes.
eyelashes last.
Oh, I don't know I don't know about that. I always paint the eyelash when I'm painting the eye because I like to connect all the eye and the eyelash and the socket at one time to keep it soft. But yeah, at the end, there's paintings where I've done the eyelash very last. So I'm doing a wash over that entire back bluff there. So I'm using some Viridian in this tree here on the left. I'm using a small brush, but I'm really using it to its full potential, really trying to um, uh, push the brush down and make a big stroke out of it. I'm painting around that tree shape because I like that slightly warm color coming through. Um, I don't know if I soften that edge or not. Yep. So I just wipe over it and just make it a slightly softer edge. I don't like a lot of hard edges meeting, here and there it's fine, but I try to soften it where I can.
It's
Doing
sort of
some-
a watercolor thing, though.
Hmm?
I said that's a very watercolor thing, the soft edges. And I mean, I know that it happens in oils and stuff, but I think watercolor has that for
Yeah, I
me.
like a mix of soft and hard edges. When I'm painting trees, whenever I'm doing the foliage of the tree, I'm often painting the shadow of the trunk at the same time, or the branches, so there is some interplay. Because when you're looking at a tree, there's a lot of softness in there. The shadows and lights all mixed together. So I'd like a combination of both. So here I am scraping in there. I probably scrape in just about every painting I do. So every artist has some signature thing they do, um, that they
That's good.
can't avoid doing. It's almost like you don't do it because a painting needs it. You do it because that's something that
That's your
works.
thing.
And I really like it in the painting. I really like it. Um, some painters have to put birds in every painting, even though, splatter, there's got to be some splatter. There's got to
Yeah.
be a
Or
bit of
drips.
teal, cobalt teal. And every painting, there's a bit of cobalt teal. And those things I think that you need to be careful about, because then it becomes a little bit rote. You see it in every painting. So what's so special about it?
Right.
So you use it when it, as a tool, you use it to create what you need to create. But just because it's playful or fun or looks cool, I kind of frown on that, um, because it just becomes a thing. But
I always find something like that I go, oh, you took so and so's class,
yeah, exactly. So
like
that
the
I was
square
looking at,
brush or the
yeah.
splatter.
But you know, in essence, that's how you learn. You learn
Right,
by
right.
doing those things, and there's good and bad for that. So if you're going to take a Mark Foley course, or you know, Joseph Spookvik course, and you're going to end up painting just like them at the end, well, then if you do a good copy, you'll think, well, I'm doing a really good job, and that's good to know how to do that.
It's good to
That you
know
can,
during the class,
yeah.
then you integrate it into your style.
And it takes a while to
Yeah,
integrate those strong styles. I know of a really good painter here who's took classes from Joseph, and his work looked just like Joseph's work, but now 15 years later, he's really developed his own loose style. I can
yeah,
see the influence, and it takes a while to get there, where other painters will not. They'll still do the same copycat thing and
yeah.
call it their own. And you know, there's not art police out there, but
No,
everybody has a potential to put their own spin on it. And it's
right.
nice to be able to see what you can bring to the medium that you can, well, not necessarily call your own, but you can look at and think, boy, I wasn't painting this way 6 years ago, and now this
Exactly.
is how I'm
Exactly.
painting. And I'd like to see that transition of from years ago where I was painting much tighter to where I'm loosening up or using color mixes or brush strokes or something that I really feel like
Your
I can,
growth. How do you
yeah.
see back your growth? Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, I like when you learn that new thing. And I mean, just like watching your demo, it's like, oh, I cannot wait to try this and how that would improve my style. And I so love this thing you did. I need that. I
Yeah.
and it's I think that finding that your style evolves and through
I think some things to stay away from. It are a lot of different colors. So I know in my workshops or my classes, I have students show up with like 120 colors,
yeah,
because some of them are really neat and a lot of them are beautiful colors. But one that makes it harder for you to learn how to mix colors, and so mix colors with what you've got, because you have crutch colors or you're going for a certain purple. And I think you become a stronger painter when you limit yourself to a dozen colors. Some colors look really cool, and I didn't used to use a lot of cerulean blue in my painting until I started painting more figure paintings from life, where there's a ton of cerulean blue in the flesh tones. And now I use it a lot in my watercolors. It's a very interesting pigment. It's a little hard to deal with because it can get very gummy and make some very ugly colors, but it can also make some very interesting cool grays.
yeah,
So trying one color from time to time, but try not to have, you know, 18 different purples that you choose from.
right,
Use one purple that you really like, because you can't mix that color. That's the thing, if you can't mix it, or use one color for granulation. But often I'll see a lot of artists using that granulation color and everything because it does that cool granulation thing,
right.
and that's all right. But I um sometimes you just see it too much. So my favorite painters are those painters that just are a master of their medium, and they're not doing any tricks or techniques, they're just painting. And like Sargent is my all-time favorite. He's just an incredible painter. And so I just try to limit myself, even though I'm tempted. I've got a lot of colors at home in my boxes that I don't use much, but you never know what's going to lift your painting is the other thing. So the quinacridone colors, they
Right.
are insanely good.
Yeah.
And I didn't use them before, but when I was painting a lot of wooden boats, I would use the quinacridone siennas because they really make that mahogany that's
Yeah.
shining with
They are
varnish.
very
Nothing else works.
rich,
I've
rich.
stopped using them now. I just tend to stick with the colors I've got because I think I think you can mix those colors on your palette and get by with them, but you never know when you're going to get a color that, again, turns your paintings into something that you can call your own. So it's a little bit of, I guess it's just restraint. Do I really need to spend $30 on that new red? Or will the red
Opera?
that I've always been using work?
You need opera.
Well, yeah, opera's also a good color for skin tones.
Yeah,
But
fluorescent color, boy.
opera is so
Yeah.
fugitive that it'll just disappear.
Yeah.
Um, so, but you can mix those colors. I mean, often I'll, in class, I'll say, we don't have yellow ochre. Well, let's mix it. Let's mix a raw sienna. Let's mix an umber, because you can get by with, really, you can get by with 4 colors.
Yeah.
I did an oil painting just yesterday of a really moody, low light seascape, and I just used white, blue, ultramarine blue, quinacridone and rose, and cad yellow. Those 3 colors plus the white, that's all I needed. And again, that'll make you a better painter because you're able to see how you can make something warmer, cooler, richer, grayer with just those
Pushes you.
colors.
Pushes you. Well, we're running out of time. We got about maybe 10 more minutes.
All right, so I'm going to, what do we got here on the video? Just a few more minutes on the video here.
Okay.
And in fact, I can probably zoom it up and ask questions I got here. I've got 4 minutes left on the video.
Okay. If anybody has any questions they would like to shout out, feel free. Do you said that you do oils. Do you do that plein air also?
Yes. Yeah. As often as I can. They just turn out better. My struggles are doing large oils in the studio. And
Uh-huh.
it takes me a while. I mean, it's a 3-day, 4-day process for me to do a large oil. And I like the challenge, but it is, yeah, it is a challenge. You'd think it would be easier than watercolor. And I've painted oil for a long time, but it's just it's a, it's a different head frame.
Mine,
So
don't you have to, do you have a trouble switching from that light to dark to light?
no, I think with oil, I have a problem of keeping it. I want it to be fresh and look fresh, and trying. I have a tendency to go into using my whites to gray things down, and it'll tend to deaden things. When you add white to any oil paint, it's gonna make it less rich.
Right.
So sometimes I'll just try to rely on the pure pigment. Um, and like use my cadmium yellow light as my lightest color and try using that as much as I can. But you need to gray down certain colors. So yeah, I just find it a different process, and I just like the process of painting and mixing the colors. I find when you're going out to paint on site, oil is easier to, if you're looking at a color and say, okay, that's a warm gray, it's easier to mix it in oil than in watercolor, because
Yeah.
you may know the color and you mix it, but when you put it down on the paper and it dries, it's not going to be strong enough. Whereas oil, you mix it, there it is, you put it down and it stays there. Um, so here's the close-up. You can see some of the overpainting of the brush strokes here. Some nice rich darks back there under the trees. Little specks of kind of warm gray for figures back there. For the waves there in the water, I just painted around the white of the paper. That definitely takes some practice to do that. I may draw where I think I want to do a crashing wave, but just you have to leave that white bit of the paper. Colors are pretty earthy in general in this one. Figure's a little dorky, but I like the labradoodle there.
I like the figure.
And in the shadows here, you can see, oh, did it again. The shadows here, you can see in the on the left-hand side, just below that light bit of the tree trunk there. So in that
Uh-huh.
tree, you can see there's some almost pure ultramarine in there. And
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
right, so that, and there's some darker grays. They're almost going to olive. And on the other side, it's a little richer, a little bit more rose. And then behind that is probably a little bit less rose and more green. So those kinds of really subtle grays really excite me painting those things because they're similar, but that subtleness to them, I just love looking at it and painting it. So when you drop down to that shadow in the grass, you can see there's some areas in that grass that are definitely more like a Prussian blue or a blue gray with some green. That bluish bit is the original shadow color. And when I washed over it with the green, you can see how it changed that shadow color to make it more
Uh-huh.
green.
Yeah.
So some areas I leave that background shadow intact and I do it pretty organically. I just brush over it. And sometimes I like how it ends up. Sometimes I may not like it as much, but I just kind of do it without fussing about it too much.
Well, I think that is why your paintings are so fresh and spontaneous, is that consideration that you've developed in that the way that you paint is so fresh and just spontaneous that it's, for me, watercolor that makes it exciting like that, like you say, with these little pops of color that are just show up. And it's so subtle. I love it. I'm so happy you did this.
So before we go
Yes,
for
sir.
plein air, I'll show you these little kits, even though I don't typically like them because there's so little room to mix, right?
Right.
But they're easy, they're portable, and you can do a painting this size, small, like a 10 by 7 painting, that
With that
size
little,
with that little thing. That's not hard to do. Anything bigger than that, you probably shouldn't be using that for. But they're really good, and it's good to have something small. And then I'll show you the squash study. There's the gouache study.
wow. Oh, lovely.
So I kind of use it like watercolor, but also so I make it soupy, kind of like pea soup in a bit. So nothing really strong, but that I would use this for watercolor or an oil painting.
That's lovely.
The other thing that I suggest also doing are these kinds of studies like that, just single, the value studies.
Do you do
So
that on site too?
I will do that on site. Sometimes I'll do it if I have time. Often I'll do it when I'm just doing something from a sketch. I'll do a value study first. But
Uh-huh.
what that does is it starts telling you where you want to tie your shapes together, how strong you need to make your washes. When I'm teaching students, often they have a hard time making really strong
Yeah.
washes like this. So
Yeah.
when you do a little study, it'll say, "Oh, I really need to add more pigment in there if I want to make it that dark." So that's a good thing. That's definitely good.
You have
Good.
one of your sketchbooks handy?
I do. I do watercolor sketchbooks, and I do a lot of my thinking for my paintings in sketching just in general. So let's see here. So this would be my typical travel sketchbook here.
Nice.
So
Now is that's watercolor you said?
yeah, these are all watercolor. So this is a Moleskine sketchbook, and the paper in the Moleskine is just hideous paper. It's really hard to paint on. But once you are used to it, you can get the gist of it. So, basically that's a colored sketch,
Yeah.
pencil sketch. So I always try to bring something like that around. This is a bigger sketchbook here, sketch of Italy. So, um, so this is what I will bring with me when I'm traveling. Um,
A bigger
but
book.
yeah, a bigger book. It's the
Oh,
paper
nice.
quality is not that good, but actually, painting on lesser quality paper is also good. So if you like Canson Montval paper, it's
Uh-huh.
cheap. I don't think it has any cotton in it. It's very challenging to work on, but it retains color really good and shows off color really well.
Oh,
It's good to try because it will challenge how you paint. You can't paint the way you would paint on a cotton rag paper, and I think those kinds of things are like plein air painting. You're challenged. You got to figure it out in your head. I need to use less water. I can't work wet and wet. I have to put this down first time.
right.
Here's another value study of another. This is around the corner, a place that I paint a lot.
Do you use
So
ink or a gray?
no, I will use I'll use neutral tint.
Oh yeah, yep.
And then this is my regular sketchbook. And so this is, that would be a typical study sketch
Is
that I would
that
do.
graphite?
That is graphite. Yeah, I use a very thick, soft pencil. And so here, this was a drawing I did. It's backwards, right? Hold on, get the light off
Okay.
of it.
Yeah.
Let's see here. So I was painting in Boston, and this is a neighborhood where of houses, a row of houses, and I just cemented those shapes in my head by drawing this quick study. I
And then
threw
you
down.
wrote colors?
Yep, and then I would go over and redraw it on the paper and refer to this. But the mail carrier was walking up the street, and I threw them down here in the sketch, right?
Yeah.
And in 30 seconds they were gone. I added that. That actually became the subject of my painting, was a mail carrier. And this guy here was working on the roof. There were some painters, so capturing his stance. So I always try to have a sketchbook, or I'll draw on the margins of my paper. Again, this is another sketch I did in Boston before I did the painting of the scene. So drawing it is like the first thing that sets the painting in your head. When you're
Mhm.
drawing, you're seeing it, it's going through your head, now your arms and your fingers and on the paper. And you start taking that image and making it your own by doing a quick sketch first. Then when you start doing the painting, some of that stuff is already in your brain, so you pull from it as opposed to jumping right in or working from a photograph.
Yeah.
So I always try to sketch first. It's a really important first step.
Great, great advice. I agree. Totally. God, thank you so much, Mike. I'm gonna stop this.
Okay.
Stop recording. Stop.